We are happy to welcome you to our fifth Sunday special day today. We thank you for being present. Those of you who are joining us online, we're happy to have you in our Bible class time. On fifth Sundays, we have a special speaker, and we are indeed delighted to have Tony Lawrence with us today. Tony lives in McMinnville. He has recently retired from 40 years at the Bobby Branch congregation and staying busy, I'm glad, preaching the gospel. Tony's a great preacher. You'll enjoy this day, and we're glad that he can be with us. Tony's been with us before, so he shouldn't be a stranger to most of you. Come preach to us.
Told Brother James that I retired at the end of May, and so for the last 4 Sundays I have sat in the pew. And I told my wife, I said, that's a good thing that I sat in the pew, because now I know what you're thinking, what's going through your mind, and how you are sort of dealing with the lessons that are presented. And I'm going to try to be as practical and as beneficial as I could possibly be today. I remember having a teacher when I was studying in graduate school who said, what matters is your take-home pay. He said, they can tell you how much they're going to pay you, but he says, what matters is how much you take home with you. And when you think about studying God's Word, I can give you a great title, and everybody says, boy, that's cute. But what is important is, what do you walk out the back door with? What's it going to do and impact in your life, and how are you going to deal with things such as that? Brother James says, I'm retired. I told somewhere, I spoke last Thursday or Wednesday night, and I told him, I said, I'm the unemployed preacher now. So, and one of the elders got up after that and said, well, you said you were going to preach by appointment. And so he says, we've just appointed you to preach tonight. So so he said, don't say you're unemployed. But it's so good to have you here this morning. And I want to talk about overcoming opposition. And in order to do that, I want to begin, first of all, with asking you, and I'm going to put the scriptures on the screen, so I assume that, yeah, it's on this one over here anyway. But what I want to do is I want to begin, first of all, by presenting to you what I feel like most of us are dealing with in our everyday lives. When I began preaching, if you were a Christian, you were in the majority. People treated you like you were somebody. On the other hand, now, if you go to certain parts of our country and you say, I'm a Christian, I'm talking about here in the United States, people are going to look at you and maybe use some sort of words to describe you that are not very complimentary. I want you to listen what Peter writes. Therefore, since Christ suffered for us in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same mind. For he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin, that he should no longer live the rest of his time in the flesh for the lust of men, but for the will of God. For we have spent enough of our past lifetime doing the will of the Gentiles, when we walked in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties, and abominable idolatries. In regard to these, they think it strange that you do not run with them in the same flood of dissipation, speaking evil of you. Now, we're not that far from Tennessee Tech. And Tennessee Tech is where both of my sons attended, at least for a little while. And they will tell you that this is a very conservative school with people who are striving to get an education. However, I will tell you that if you go to the campus, you'll probably find what he described here in verse 3 as a common activity on any given night. Where you have people, for instance, who are living in lewdness, lust, drunkenness, revelries, drinking parties. It's there, folks. And children, young people, are being raised in this environment, and the impression that is being placed on many people's minds is, if you don't participate in these things, we're not really happy with you. We want you to agree with our lifestyle. He said, they will speak evil of you. Now, how do I, as a parent, a grandparent, or maybe perhaps some of you young people who are parents, deal with things like this? How do we address this kind of opposition that we meet in this life? Well, Peter wrote to weary Christians discouraged from the heated attacks. You see, it sort of is like an ebb and a flow, like the waves of the ocean comes in. And, you know, when I was reared and growing up in the 60s and 70s as a young fella, I saw a lot of conservative things in Alabama where I grew up. However, now things are not the same. I guarantee they're not the same here than when you grew up either. And I'm hoping, and I really have a desire, that things are going to return. We've got some great young folks at Bobby Branch who've got good parents who are trying to rear them the right way. And I'm going to talk about that in our lesson this afternoon. But I want you to understand, how do you and I deal with this kind of opposition that comes? We learn in 2 Corinthians chapter 2 and verse 11, he says, lest Satan should gain advantage over us, for we are not ignorant of his devices. Now, I don't want us to become ignorant of Satan's devices. The tricks that he uses. The method, in fact, that's the original word there, the trickery, the methodia, the way the devil goes about trying to persuade us and to influence us. Well, I always believe the Bible has the answer. And the answer to dealing with this opposition, I think, can be greatly appreciated by studying the book of Nehemiah, chapters 4 through 6. So if you've got your Bibles, that's where we're going to go. And we're going to look at how Nehemiah dealt with opposition that was coming to him. Now, I'm going to give you a little background about what took place so that you can appreciate that. But there are going to be 6 things that I want us to look at. First of all, before we look at those 6 things, I want to talk to you just a little bit about some background. Children of Israel had been so disobedient to God that he had to send them into captivity. They spent 70 years in captivity under the Babylonians. The Medo-Persian Empire came and conquered the Babylonians and said, you folks can go back home now. And when they go back home, they're going to rebuild the temple. They're going to rebuild the city. But if you'll notice what takes place, I want you to look with me at Nehemiah chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. Then I said to them, you see the distress that we're in, that Jerusalem lies in waste, its gates are burned with fire. Come and let us build the wall of Jerusalem, that we may no longer be a reproach. And I told them, let the hand of my God, which was good upon me, and also the king's words that he had spoken to me. So they said, let us rise up and build. Then they set their hands to this good work. People were discouraged. They looked at their city. It was all destroyed. I mean, it was so bad that you couldn't even ride a horse through the wall. Nehemiah did that, by the way. And I would ask you, are you discouraged with the moral climate of our country today? Does it bother you that you, as a Christian, would not feel welcome in some places? Now, let me just for a moment mention a couple things. I've got friends who live in Colorado, and they say as soon as you step off the plane, you smell pot. I've got another friend who preaches in Missouri, and they just opened up dispensaries, is what they're calling them now, to sell marijuana just down the street from the church building in Missouri. I know our Supreme Court ruled on Thursday that there was a state up north that had decided that they wanted to teach little children, kindergartners, that it was okay to be a homosexual, this LGBT stuff. And you realize that there are places where you would go and you'd say, I don't believe that. And they'd say, well, then you're not welcome here. The moral climate of our country is discouraging to me. Well, when people oppose us, how are we going to respond to that? What are we going to say? Well, from the very outset of Nehemiah's job, there were people who were saying, we don't like it and we don't want it. Notice with me chapter 2, verses 19 and 20. But when Sanballat the Horonite, Tobiah the Ammonite official, and Geshem the Arab heard of it, they laughed at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Will you rebel against the king? So I answered them and said to them, the God of heaven himself will prosper us. Therefore, we as servants will arise and build, but you have no heritage or right or memorial in Jerusalem. These three leaders were people who had settled the land while the children of Israel were gone. You remember, they had been in captivity. And these are the people who are saying, we're in control now and we don't want you to have influence. Let me tell you, in the moral climate which we are in our country today, as those people who want immorality to be a part of our society, they're in control. And as we try to step up and say, but I don't believe in that. I respect God. I respect His Word. And they'll look at us and say, we're in control and we're not going to give it up to you. Do y'all realize that's what's going on there? The parallel. My purpose in setting the stage is for us to see the parallel between what you and I may be facing and what they faced. Well, hostile forces use numerous avenues of frustration, and they'll think, maybe these people will just give up. Maybe these Christians, now you can say, well, no, they won't. I'd suggest to you, you go to Europe and visit and look and see what you see in churches there. You're not going to see churches, you're going to see church buildings. You're going to see cathedrals with nobody in them. And you know what happens? People sometimes just lay down and give up. How are you and I going to say, I'm not going to lay down, I'm not going to give up, I am going to remain true, and I'm going to teach my children to remain true? Well, here's what we're going to look at. And wow, did I spend 15 minutes getting started? Well, let's start. And there's 6 things, and we're going to go through these quickly. We're going to look at opposition through ridicule, opposition through threat, opposition through extortion, opposition through compromise, opposition through slander, and opposition through deceit. So let's chapter 4, beginning with verse 2. And he spoke before his brethren in the army of Samaria and said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they fortify themselves? Will they offer sacrifices? Will they complete it in a day? Will they revive the stones from the heaps of rubbish, stones that are burned? Now Tobiah the Ammonite was beside him, and he said, whatever they build, even if a fox goes up on it, he will break down their stone wall. Notice how they ridicule and make fun of him. What will these feeble Jews do? Now you think about that. As I get older, I understand what the word feeble means now. If you don't believe that, wait till you get to an age where you get down in the floor to play with the kids, and then it's time to get up out of the floor. And you'll understand what the word feeble means. And their view of this is to use a pejorative term to say feeble Jews. They have no power, they have no ability, they have no strength. Then it was directed against their religion. Will they offer sacrifices? Do they think their God's going to take care of them? Then it was directed toward their diligence. Will they complete it in a day? Are they going to get out there and work so hard? Sometimes a task seems so daunting, it's so large, that we don't feel like we can get it done. Do you ever feel like we're fighting against a losing battle? You got the news media that's against us. They make fun of us right-wing extremists. Yeah, if you're here this morning, you're a right-wing extremist because you actually chose to come to church this morning. Directed against the quality. He said if a fox were to go run up on it, he would knock down their stone wall. He's saying, you're not smart enough to be able to build a wall that can stand up against a fox running. A fox is a little small animal, about the size of a dog. Can you imagine? Here's a stone wall. He goes up, hits the wall falls. Do you think that we're ridiculed at all? I do. And if people want to ridicule us, how are you going to respond to that? Well, I want you to look at what people say. Who do you think you are? Do you think you're better than us? People who say, do you believe that you folks think you're a better quality than we are? Why are you knocking yourself out? You'll never last. We're going to win. Notice Nehemiah 4 verse 6. So we built the wall, and the entire wall was joined together up to half its height, for the people had a mind to work. You mean to tell what we've got to do when it comes to dealing with this kind of opposition? Just ignore it. And we've got to get out and work, because the job we're trying to do and preach the gospel and teach people to obey God so they can spend an eternity in heaven, that's too important of a job to let people make fun of us and let it bother us. When you find that kind of opposition, you just got to overcome it. Now let's go to chapter 4, verses 7 and 8, and then we'll look at verse 11. Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, the Arabs, the Ammonites, and the Ashdodites heard that the walls of Jerusalem were being restored and the gaps were beginning to be closed, that they became very angry. And all of them conspired together to come and attack Jerusalem and create confusion. They're saying, hey, they're being successful. Look at verse 11. And our adversary said, they will neither know nor see anything till we come into their midst and kill them and cause the work to cease. We're going to threaten these people. We're going to tell them that we're going to attack them and we're going to make them scared. They think either they'll be so afraid to do anything that they won't act, or they'll either be distracted. And there are people today who would say, you know what, if you get on the television and you preach that homosexuality is a sin, we're going to charge you with hate language. And you may say, well, that won't happen. Folks, it's happening in Canada right now. There are churches that they've actually barred the doors because they had the audacity to say God calls it an abomination. And if it happens there, what do you think where it's going to happen next? Now, the threats that are being made here are to try to slow us down. And in some places, Christians are being threatened with physical harm. We've got brethren on the continent of Africa who are living in now Muslim-dominated countries who are actually being physically persecuted. And their idea is if we just keep the pressure on, they're going to give up. Just make the threats. Notice Nehemiah's response, verse 14. And I arose and said to the nobles and to the leaders and to the rest of the people, do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, the great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters and your wives and your houses. He said to them, don't be afraid of these people. You've got to remember who's on your side. The Lord is on your side. If the Lord's on your side, the Lord's on my side, we're not going to lose. Does that mean the devil won't get the upper hand occasionally? Oh, he might. He may win a skirmish or two here, but I can tell you who's going to win the battle. You want to study a really good book? I can tell you where you can find it. Right at the back of your Bible. It's called the Book of Revelation. And while you may not understand every symbol that is being used in that book, there's one thing that you will walk away with when you finish reading the Book of Revelation. God and His people win. Every time. And when it's all over, it's like the song we sing, "This is my Father's world." Though the wrongs seem all so strong, God is the ruler yet. Philippians 4 verse 6, be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. I would tell you that if you're under threat, learn to do what we're told to do, and that is to pray to God and ask for strength, ask for help. Make sure that we're focused on accomplishing His mission. Number 3, turn with me to chapter 5 now. Let's look at verses 1 through 3, and we're going to see a real difficult challenge now. And there was a great outcry of the people and their wives against their Jewish brethren. For there were those who said, we, our sons and our daughters are many, therefore let us get grain that we may eat and live. There were also some who said, we have mortgaged our lands and our vineyards and houses that we might buy grain because of the famine. Now, when you look at this, you realize this is not coming from the outside. This is coming from inside. This is not Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem. These are their Jewish brethren. And I know sometimes we want to think we don't ever have to worry about those on the inside being our problem. We have to worry about those on the outside. But I'm going to tell you, the devil's smart enough to know to get inside and to have some naysayers inside the body. I want you to look with me at verses 6 and 7. And I became very angry when I heard their outcry and these words. After serious thought, I rebuked the nobles and the rulers and said to them, each of you is exacting usury from his brother. So I called a great assembly against them. Let me tell you what's going on here. These walls are being rebuilt. People are working. They're working hard. And all of a sudden now the workers are saying, we're sorry, Nehemiah, we can't work. Well, why can't you work? We're too deep in debt. Well, how did you get deep in debt? Well, our brothers loaned us some money. You know, there's been a famine. We didn't have enough money to eat, so we had to go borrow and actually put our children, our sons and our daughters into servitude. He said, we've mortgaged our lands and our fields. And you say, well, if your brethren are helping you out, that's a good thing. Well, sometimes our brethren's help's not too good. Sometimes brethren trying to help us out are hurting us. And what ended up happening is these brethren were taking all of the time, all of the energy that should have been spent building the wall to take care of them. Let me be a little plain here just a moment. sometimes when the church is trying to do its job, we got folks on the inside who's taking all the time, all the energy, all the effort. This one over here is said, I need your attention. I want your attention. And the elders are spending all their time. I'm retired now, so I can say what I want to. Coddling the members. Y'all know what that means, don't you? That's a good Alabama word. And the work of preaching the gospel is not taking place. You know why? Because we're so busy trying to take care of people who, I need this, I need that. Instead of saying, put me to work, they're saying, spend time on me. And the opposition now, the frustration, is not coming from those people on the outside. The frustration is coming from those people who are on the inside. Now, these people did not have an answer for what they were doing. Look with me at the latter part of verse 8. Then they were silenced and found nothing to say. You know why? They knew they were guilty. Now, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but do you think the church has ever had to spend time on me, take care of my wishes, my will, my desires, instead of being able to spend time on what needed to be done? Sometimes the greatest hindrance in the Lord's work are our brethren who are taking all the time, all the energy to keep them happy. And while we're finding opposition on the outside, we're actually sometimes finding opposition on the inside. Now, I've not even addressed the false teachers. I remember having a class under Brother Thomas Warren, and he was talking about the importance of our being evangelistic, carrying the gospel into all the world. And how that's what the church is to do. That's what we're to be focused on. He says, but it seems like every time that we're perched ready to do some great work, that some false doctrine comes up into the church, and what we're having to do, we're having to put it down. We're having to put it down. Whether it was antiism in the 1950s and 60s, or whether it was the liberalism that took place in the 70s and the 80s, the Boston movement that came through. It seems like there's just something coming up all the time that just robs the church of its energy. Now, the truth will prevail, as it did here. But we've got to make sure we're not taking away their energy. Look at verses 15 and 16. He says, but the former governors who were before me laid burdens on the people and took from them bread and wine besides the 40 shekels of silver. Yes, even their servants bore rule over the people. But I did not do so because of the fear of God. Indeed, I also continued the work on the wall and did not buy any land. All of my servants gathered there for the work. Now, I can't help what people did before me. Y'all understand that? What has happened has happened. What is history is history. But I can control what I do. And I can control who I am and the choices I make. And he says, I did not do so, verse 15, because of the fear of God. I respect God enough that I'm not going to do, and I would like to encourage all of us, let's resolve right now that we're not going to be a hindrance to the church, but we're going to be a help. That we're going to be focused on pleasing God and doing what God wants us to do. And he says, what happened? I continued the work on the wall. Now, if you will, let's go to chapter 6. Let's go to verses 1 and 2. We're going to return to these three hooligans that are running the show. Now, it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem, the Arab, and the rest of the enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall and that there were no breaks left in it, though at that time I had not hung the doors of the gates. that Sanballat and Geshem sent to me, saying, Come and let us meet together in the villages and the plains of Ono. But they thought to do me harm. You see, what they're wanting to do is they're wanting to get Nehemiah away from the work, and they said, what we need to do is we need to sit down and talk about all of this. We need to have a compromise, Nehemiah. I know what you're doing. You're trying to get these walls built, but we need to have a talk about this. At some point, and we may be at that point here in our country right now, it's almost like a scale here. Things get a little better, things get a little worse, things get a little better, things get a little worse. And with those who are on the opposition side see that we are prevailing in some areas, and I will say this, I think a couple of the Supreme Court rulings this past week have been positive news for the truth, that there are going to be some people who are going to jump hard on the other side and say, okay, well, let's compromise about this. Let's see if we can work out some areas. You give a little bit, and I'll give a little bit. Well, Nehemiah's reply was classic. I just love the way Nehemiah was such a brilliant man with the wisdom that God gave him. Verse 3, so I sent messengers to them saying, I am doing a great work so that I cannot come down. Why should the work cease while I leave it and go down to you? But they sent me this message 4 times, and I answered them in the same manner. Boy, isn't that a classic reply? Let's talk about it. No, I'm not coming to talk about it. I know what I'm doing. I know why I'm doing it. And I'm not interested in trying to compromise. Because if I compromise, I'm going to give up something. Many years ago, there were unity meetings that took place in the 1930s. Brother H. Leo Bowles was a very bold voice during that time to say, you know where we stand? That's where we've always stood. And you want us to be at one with unified? You know what you left? Here it is. Come back to it. Same sort of unity meetings occurred in the 1970s and 80s. Sad to say, some of the brethren said then, well, let's figure out how we can get along with everybody and let's just see if we can compromise. No, you need to go back and listen to what Nehemiah said. Should I leave this great work that I'm doing in order for us to compromise, for us to give up something? He said, I can't give it up that I should come down to you. I'll tell you, there's no room for compromise when you're doing the Lord's work, when you're doing what He told you to do. When you study the book of Galatians, such a wonderful book, the Apostle Paul realized that those churches which today are located in what's now central Turkey, that there were people coming through saying, unless you are circumcised and keep the law of Moses, you can't be saved. That's Acts 15, beginning with verse 1. And they were saying, this is what you've got to do. And that was troubling the church. And there were some who were accepting a false gospel, a perverted gospel, if you will. He says, and this occurred because of false brethren secretly brought in, who came in by stealth to spy out our liberty which we have in Christ Jesus, that they might bring us into bondage. Now listen to verse 5. To whom we did not yield submission even for an hour, that the truth of the gospel might continue with you. Do you know why Paul and Barnabas went up to Jerusalem to meet with the apostles and the elders about that question? Is because had they surrendered 1 iota. You go to chapter 5 of Galatians, he said, you who be justified by the law, you are fallen from grace. You would lose the backing of God. Do you know what Nehemiah understood? If I compromise with you, I'm going to lose the backing of the one who's making all this possible. We may think in the Lord's church that to compromise with the opposition sometimes is the right thing to do, but I can tell you it's the wrong thing to do. Because if we choose to go another direction that God has told us, of what God has told us, then we will lose His backing. And that is so serious. Now let's go to verses 5 through 7 of chapter 6. This is actually a continuation of what was earlier. Then Sanballat sent his servant to me as before, the 5th time, with an open letter in his hand. It was written, "It is reported among the nations," and Geshem says that you and the Jews plan to rebel. "Therefore, according to these rumors, you are rebuilding the wall that you may be their king. And you also have appointed prophets to proclaim concerning you at Jerusalem, saying, 'There's a king in Judah.' Now these matters will be reported to the king, so come therefore and let us consult together." Now notice with me verse 5. This is the 5th time. He sent this message 4 times, and Nehemiah kept saying, "No, no, no, no." Okay, Nehemiah, if you're going to say no, we're going to do something that'll get your attention. We're going to slander you. We're going to tell people that you want to be a king. So you need to come and consult with us. We're going to put some pressure on you, if you will. If a person will not give in to the demands, they're often slandered with false accusation. And it was a false accusation. Nehemiah never intended to be the king. He was sent there by the king. But there are people here who are going to try to say something about him that's not true. Do you think that Christians have ever had somebody try to put pressure on us by saying things about us that are not true? And you say, well, that wouldn't sway me. Let me tell you, there was a ruthless man who was a governor in Judea. He had been appointed by the emperor to be the governor of Judea. And all you have to do, if you want to read Josephus, is read about this man by the name of Pilate. Now, you can go to Luke 13, and the Bible tells us that Pilate had mingled the blood of these martyrs with his sacrifices. I mean, he had no problem killing people. But when Jesus had been arrested and brought before Pilate, Pilate was trying to get out and diffuse a real tense situation. And he wanted to turn Jesus loose. He knew that it was for envy that they had delivered him up. Look at John 19:12. From then on, Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, saying, "If you let this man go, then you are not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar." Was Pilate Caesar's friend? Absolutely he was. But you see, these people were trying to use slander against Pilate to put pressure on him. And you know what it did? It got to him. Sometimes slander can get to us. You people who are believing in the Bible, you're a bunch of ignorant rednecks. You're a bunch of people who actually believe in that old antiquated book, and you really don't have a very good education. I find that to be one of the slanders, to suggest that people who are believers in God are somehow ignorant. Christians have to face scandalous, made-up charges. Listen to what Nehemiah did in verses 8 and 9. Then I said to him, saying, no such things as you say, are being done, but you invent them in your own heart. For they are all trying to make us afraid, saying, their hands will be weakened in this work, and it will not be done. Now therefore, O God, strengthen my hands. I would just tell you, I am amazed at how well Nehemiah is weathering the opposition. He's just not letting it get to him. And he would say, what you're saying is not true. It's all right to say, you're lying. You're not telling the truth about me. Last one, let's take this seat. Afterward, I came to the house of Shemaiah, the son of Delaiah, the son of Mehetabel, who was a secret informer. And he said, let us meet together in the house of God within the temple, and let us close the doors of the temple, for they're coming to kill you, and indeed they will come at night to kill you. And I said, should such a man as I flee? And who is there who is such as I, who would go into the temple of God to save his life? I will not go in. Then I perceived that God had not sent him at all, that he had pronounced this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. And for this reason he was hired, that I should be afraid and act that way, and, don't miss this word, and sin, so that they might have cause for an evil report, that they might reproach me. They were trying to trick Nehemiah into going into the temple, something that he had no right to do, because Nehemiah is of the tribe of Judah. You know who gets to go into the temple? Levites. But what they would say, situation ethics works here. All you've got to do, because they're going to kill you, is just run into the temple and hide there. Nehemiah said, I'm not going to do that, because I'm not going to do that in sin. There are people always who are trying to look for something among us to try to have an accusation, and they're not above deceit. If you don't love the Lord and you don't want to do what's right, it's no big thing if you lie, cheat, steal, deceit. Because there are always people out there ready to find anybody and everybody that they can find who is a hypocrite. Do you believe there are hypocrites in the church? Absolutely. Always have been. And I assume will be till the Lord comes again. And the critics would love to find something to make an accusation. Listen to Lamentations 2:16. All your enemies have opened their mouth against you. They hiss, they gnash their teeth. They say, we have swallowed her up. Surely this is the day we have waited for. We have found it. We have seen it. We've been looking for this. I have no connection to Jim and Tammy Faye Baker or to Jimmy Swaggart or any of those who are part of that Pentecostal movement. But do you know what the media loved when they found out they were being hypocritical in what they were teaching and practicing? Look at it. That's what all Christians are. They're just all a bunch of hypocrites. Well, let me bring all of this to a conclusion here. There's a whole lot more I need to have said, but I've been trying to speed it up as I watch the clock up there. Nehemiah and the Jews had a laser-like focus to get the job done. In other words, their minds were focused. Look at chapter 6, verses 15 and 16. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of Elul in 52 days. And it happened when all our enemies heard of it and the nations around us saw these things, that they were disheartened in their own eyes. Now, don't miss the last. In fact, if you underline your Bible, you need to underline this. For they perceived that this was a work done by our God. 52 days. They rebuilt those walls. You know why they could do that? Because they had their hearts, their minds, their energies focused on there's an opposition over here. Okay, there's another opposition over here. There's another opposition over here. But you know what they did? They said, no, we're not going to let that bother us. We have an obligation to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. That's our obligation. That's the mission the Lord gave us. Now, what are we going to do? Are we going to allow the world over here to get us sidetracked and to get us distracted and get us focused on that? Or are we going to allow all of this influence sometimes within the church to make us take our energies over there? No, we've got to keep our minds focused. And then, you remember what Paul wrote to the Corinthians? He said, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. If we do what God tells us to do, and we overcome that opposition, we can expect opposition, but we can overcome. And I want to encourage you. This is not an invitation in this class, but I don't want you to ever let opposition to keep you from obeying the gospel. Don't let opposition keep us from preaching the gospel. Now, did you say at 9:45 is when I was supposed to stop? Oh, I got another bell? In about 2 minutes, okay. I was really shooting for the 9:45, and I thought I've already gone over a little bit. But let me say this. Individually, that's the way we're all going to have to look at this. And you and I are going to have to ask ourselves, when we live in this culture, when we live in this society, am I going to become depressed? And I'm going to become discouraged? And I'm going to become distracted? Or am I going to become focused? Am I going to put my efforts and, like Nehemiah, I can't look back and say what the people before me did. I can't change that. But I am going to say, like Joshua did in chapter 24, as for me and my house, we'll serve the Lord. And we may not be able to do something about other people, but we can do something about us. And we can do something about where we are. And we can do something about the focus that we have. And it's my opinion that today, the Lord's church really needs churches, congregations that will say, now it's our time to stand up and shine. Our time to do His will. I believe that's where I need to stop.